All right. Today we are going to look at using third-party APIs on our Django backend. We will cover why to use third-party APIs. We're going to explore an API we're going to use called the Noun project. We'll see how to set it up on the backend, and we'll talk about why we do that, how to actually interact with it, and handling secrets like API keys that you don't want to share publicly because then some random person could use the API you're paying for and drive up your costs. In part two of the lecture, and today, because we have retro at 11, I think it's going to be back to back. We'll see on dealing with formatting the JSON data that we get back from API responses. We'll play around with our models more to use some of that data, and we'll see how to fake or mock third-party API calls for testing. So, we've used the Poke API, and in a little bit, we'll look at the Noun API. But we talked to this third-party API through our front-end app, our React app, right? Where we have, and let's make this bigger. We have the browser, and we've got our React app running in the browser. And that's the user. And then maybe on our server here in the cloud, we have our Django API server. And let me give us a little more room in this cloud. We have our Django server. We have our database. And this is what we talked about yesterday, this HTTP request response flow. Now, we might want to use someone else's API like the Poke API. And let's actually make this, see if we can make this maybe like a hexagon. There we go. And what we're used to is in our React lessons, we had our React app talk directly to the Poke API. There's a couple issues with this. For one thing, maybe it's not a Poke API, maybe it's like a real estate housing prices API, and we're building some sort of real estate application, and we need to manipulate that data. Maybe we also have to pay for the use of this third-party API. And the problem with having the front-end code do it directly is any code in the browser, someone malicious can look at and open up the view source tab in DevTools and manipulate. So if I put like an API key here, that's a real security issue. Also, we might not want to send all the data directly back. So we'll talk in a bit about the values of this, but it gives us actually a lot of control that if we need to get something from a third-party API, we do it through our own Django API as a sort of a middleman. Maybe we even cache some data in our database, maybe not. And then it goes back there. And I realize that's a bit of a terrible drawing, and so we also have some slides as well. So here's sort of the same diagram, but a bit cleaner. And the example here is with the Noun API, where you can see that we've got our web app. Maybe it's on a desktop, maybe it's we're looking at a website on our phone, and we talk to our Django web server. If we want to get data from the Noun API, we don't need to go to our database. We can go to their web server, and talk to their API that talks to their database, and then the information comes back, and then we send it back to our client, and this gives us a lot of control. So why third-party APIs? We're going to see this Python requests library in a minute, which has this amazing logo. But it can make stuff a lot simpler and have a better user experience. And in fact, can I just get some volunteers, and I might just do a little voluntelling here to kind of read the different parts of this. Let's see here. Jason Anderson, could you read just like this first part here about handling third-party APIs and the first point?
Sure.
Thank you.
Handling API requests through a backend framework like Django offers several advantages. Number one, security. By making API requests from the backend, you can keep sensitive information like API keys, tokens, and credentials hidden from the client-side code. This helps prevent exposing sensitive data to potential malicious actors.
Thank you, Jason. Yeah,
Mhm.
and I know we're going to do a bit of reading here, but actually each of these 5 points are really important. So I figure this way you don't have to hear my voice all day. Rachel, can you just maybe read point number 2 here for us? Or
Can you hear me?
yes.
Authorization and authentication. Backend frameworks provide robust mechanisms for handling user authentication and authorization. By integrating API requests within the backend, you can ensure that only authenticated users with the proper permissions can access and consume the API endpoints.
Thank you. Yeah, and over the next several days, next week, we'll be learning about authentication. Morty, can you read point 3 for us, please? Or Noah?
Yes.
Oh, go for it.
Mhm. I'm sorry,
Could you just read point 3 here, please?
his internet looks frozen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no worries, Morty. I'm
I
gonna
can
I'm gonna tap someone in for you.
I can read it real quick.
Go for it. Thank you, Jason.
Okay. Business logic. Backend frameworks allow you to incorporate business logic and data processing before responding to API requests. This flexibility enables you to validate, transform, or aggregate data from the third-party API responses, enhancing the functionality and usability of your application.
Thank you, Jason. And we're actually gonna see this in action today when we write code. Noah, could you read point 4 here, please?
CORS and security policies. Cross-origin resource sharing, or CORS, policies enforced by web browsers can limit direct API requests made from client-side JavaScript. By making API requests from the backend, you can avoid CORS-related issues and enforce security policies consistently.
Awesome. Thank you, man. And we'll learn about cross-origin resource sharing towards the end of next week. And Stephanie, could you read this last point, please?
Abstraction
No worries.
by encapsulating API requests with your backend framework, you can create reusable modules or services that handle the interaction with the third-party APIs. This abstraction makes it easier to maintain and modify the API integration logic across your application.
Sorry about that screen jump. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, and the context here, this point about abstraction might sound a little odd, but imagine that we have a desktop web app and a native mobile app. If we're not using a cross-platform tool like Kotlin or React Native, we might have a mobile app written in Swift for iOS and another mobile app written in Java for Android for like, Google phones and stuff, if we're a big enough company. And at that point, having them all directly talk to a third-party API just is more complicated. If they can all talk to our API that then talks to a third-party API, that actually simplifies a lot of stuff from a code writing perspective. So all of these 5 points are actually like really key considerations. And like 3 weeks from now, you will have dealt directly with each of these in building both the Django app and when you start in on your personal projects. All right, so we've been doing a lot of talking here, but let's start writing some code. And let me go ahead and kind of do a little screen clearing so we don't have too much stuff. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with the noun API, and we'll set up an account and there everything in a minute. But let me show you the noun API and just quickly remind us too of the code that we're working with. We're working with the same Pokemon code from yesterday. We have our models, our Pokemon model in the Move app. We have our moves model. We have our move serializer that's using all the fields. We have our Pokemon serializer where we have set up this many-to-many relationship so that we can get back serialized information about lots of Pokemon. I've got my Django admin site set up over here, and I should be able to if I remember my API / v1 in my route, get information about Charmander, and we see all of his moves because of this awesome get moves method in the Pokemon serializer that connects the two together. So we'll be making another Django app to sort of introduce this. And then later on, we will be integrating it into our Pokemon stuff. The API we're going to be using is called the Noun API. And it's pretty simple. It's an API that gives you back simple like image assets for icons based on different nouns or words. So for our Pokemon who has a fire move, or let's see, what were some of our fixtures? I doubt Water Punch is in there, but Thunderbolt probably is. We're going to grab some images to go along with our Pokemon moves. We might actually throw in Pokemon types as well. I apologize, I got a little confused. We may throw in some Pokemon types. So in a little bit, we'll kind of go through setting up and logging in on the Noun project, and we'll walk through that. But let's do some setup work in our Django code to get ready. So let me put that kind of off to the side, and let's write a little bit of code. And just one moment. Oh, excuse me. At some point, I can definitely tell I'm going to be sneezing here. Let me go ahead and open up a second terminal session. Activate it. I'm going to make a notes file, and we're going to use this just to keep track of what we need to do. We need to create an API app, Django app. And to do this, I need to make the app. I need to add it to settings, py. I need to add a path in the project urls.py. And then we'll actually have to write some code to make it real and do something. And that's going to be sort of a separate task here. So these are my setup steps. I like pseudo coding and writing out task lists like this. Since I'm adding a new app, I might as well kill the server. And I'm going to use manage.py and the start app command to make an API app. And now that that's done, I'm going to go to settings py in the project directory, and I'm going to search for installed apps, and we're going to add our new app here. And now that I'm done that, I'm going to go to, not in any of these app directories, but in the project directory, urls py, and I'm going to add a path for our app. It's not really going to do much yet, but let's go ahead and just add it. And we'll call this one noun because we're going to be using the noun API. And we'll include API app URLs. And that doesn't really exist yet. So that's going to be my next step, is creating it. And to make my life a little easier, I am going to go to one of the other apps, let's say the Move app. And I'm just going to copy this urls.py. And then here in the API app, let's make a new file. Let's paste it in. Let's get rid of the stuff we don't want. That was all notes from yesterday. This is my little reminder to myself what the path is here. And actually, I should make sure that I didn't forget a trailing slash, as that is my big gotcha. So let's go to the right URLs py for our project. And I indeed did forget a trailing slash. And so now, obviously, we don't have a class-based view for our API app. So that's going to be the next step. So I think what I'll do is I'll open up the views from the API app, and it's pretty empty right now. And I'll put URLs py over here because I'm going to change this importing. And let's also open up the views from our Pokemon app, which is the classic. And let's just kind of copy the most important things we need. Let me see if I can select the Python interpreter so those squigglies can go away. There we go. And in fact, I'll just put this view here as a reference while I write the code for my noun API view. Now, this noun API view isn't going to do much right now. So all I want to do is I want to make a skeleton. I want it to have a get method, and I want it to say hello. I want just enough code so that it's real and I can import it, and we can then test that the new path or route we created works. So I'm going to do class, maybe, let's see, what do we want to call this? Let's call this noun project because it's going to be working with the noun project API. And it's going to inherit from API view. And someone remind me again, why do I need to write this method called get here in my API view class? What does this do? Let's see here. How about
It handles GET requests, doesn't it?
exactly. Yeah, thank you, Jason. Exactly. And we haven't done it yet, but soon we'll be writing def post for post requests. And in fact, we could write this here and it wouldn't do us any harm. Right? This is create. This is read if we're talking CRUD, create, read, update. Put would be update, and then delete would be delete. These don't really make sense with the noun project though. So right now, all I'm going to do is return a response. I'm just going to have my response say noun project. Right, this is just enough code so that when I go over here to my URLs py, and let me make sure I'm in the right spot. So let's actually go to our API app and go to its URLs py. I don't know if you all have used the breadcrumb navigator up here. It's pretty awesome. I can now change this to be what I want. And I think I'll just right click on this and we will do rename symbol and we will call it. Oh, it doesn't let me rename it. That's fine. We'll do it the other way. Noun project. And so now, fingers crossed, I should have a very simple routing setup going from API/v1 noun to here, and then for a get request going to here. So let me start my server
I'm sorry.
again.
I
Yeah.
kind of got lost once you did the rename. Could you just go back a few steps for me?
Yeah, absolutely. So the rename, all it was, I had copied this code from one of our other URLs, PY, for like the move app. So it just had the wrong thing.
Tracking.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, so, if we were to do this from scratch, we would just be doing from.views. And this is actually good, I think, to type it out this way. Import noun projects and then path. And we don't need to add anything past that. I just want API/v1/noun. And we then use our class-based view by calling its as view function. And it will do the work of figuring out for a get request, call this method. Yeah, it's the more comfortable you get with programming, the more you can use your other code or other code as guide code. And frankly, copying and pasting sort of from like a guide code example and modifying it is a really common technique. However, you can kind of bite yourself, in the foot or shoot yourself in the foot doing it like I did yesterday because it's easy to make a mistake. So when in doubt, I actually think what probably makes sense for all of you and what I would recommend is don't copy and paste the code, but like I do here with the split, have it open and type it out. And that's a much safer way that will avoid programmer error that creeps in shockingly often if you copy paste and refactor. So yes.
Why are we in the views using request? Up till this point, we've always used it when we're
Right.
defining it, but we've never actually utilized it.
Right. Yes, we're about to use it. We haven't put it into action yet, but we are going to use the Python request library to talk to the noun project API. Because we are actually going to, from our Django backend, send an HTTP request to somebody else's API.
Okay, so in the past, we've just been putting in there for like familiarity and muscle memory, kind of.
Let's see. Let's go to the view file. Let me get rid of this annotator.
All the projects in the past have included request in the actual definition for the class in the API view.
Oh, Francisco, yes.
So the request that you're referencing to, which I believe is the one you're referencing to, it's the one within the actual get function. So that's just the HTTP request that we're receiving as an argument.
Oh, that.
Yeah,
And that's
Thank
happening
you.
on line 13.
yeah, but we've never actually used that. I've removed that from all of my get requests inside of my view classes, and they all work.
Right. So what we're utilizing now is not request, it's requests with an S at the end. And that is the equivalent of Axios. What Axios does in JavaScript, request does for us in Python, which is just send literal HTTP requests for us. So when we're as somebody is sending a request to our server, we are sending a request to someone else's server utilizing this library here. We're not
Yeah.
using the request that's coming in from the HTTP request. We're utilizing a separate library named requests.
Okay, but that request that we have on line 13, is that actually necessary?
It's not, but sometimes we need it to get request headers and stuff later on.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Am I right on that, Francisco?
No, because we need the request within there. If you don't have request on that as a parameter, you're going to get a failure inside of the function because that's actually getting passed into that function method there.
Yeah,
So
that's what I would have thought. Let's see. Let's actually run the server and see if we can cause that error. No such file or directory. I just need to Python manage py on server. So first of all, let's test that this is working. Let's go API/v1/noun. So that's working. And now let's see if indeed it throws an error or not when we change it. Yeah. So Tim, I would have to look at your code, but what Francisco's saying here is correct, and this is in line with my understanding too. Django automatically in its URL routing passes in the HTTP request argument, so we need that argument for this to accept it, just because that's how it's designed.
Okay, maybe I'm probably just mixing wires somewhere.
Yeah, it's totally possible. This is pretty standard for a lot of frameworks that do this kind of thing. And eventually we will be using this later. But yeah, as we can see here, this error noun project get takes one positional argument, but two were given. It's saying, hey, there's self, but request was also passed in, but I didn't have it there. So we
Okay.
definitely can see. Yeah, good question though, because indeed we're not actively using it.
I think that was a confusion. We just don't actually type it else anymore.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned it too, because it is confusing. Because I totally thought you were asking about this, which we'll see in a minute, which is a totally different thing. And so, Francisco, thank you again, man.
Awesome.
Yeah, totally. All right, let's write some more code. So we've got our endpoint hooked up and running. Now let's do some stuff with it. Actually, and this is the perfect kind of transition, because we are going to use this requests library. And like Francisco was saying, this is like Axios, but for Python. And so we're going to use this inside Django. So in our Django code, we're going to use this to make an HTTP request. We'll get back a response that has a status code, it has HTTP headers, and it has JSON content. This is a pretty great library. Their docs are also great. If you go here to the API reference part of their doc, and this is API as in the interface, the API for this library, not like a REST API, we can see it's got really well described API. I know this looks a little dense, but when you're actually using it and you need to get a very specific answer, this is actually kind of amazing. So I can strongly recommend their docs. So let's go ahead, and in fact, we are going to install this. I'm a little surprised. There they have their install steps. So all we have to do is run install requests. And I'll kill my server for this. Let's do pip install requests. We're also going to need to install another library for authentication with something called OAuth, called requests OAuth lib. And this is all in our curriculum document for today. I might as well upgrade pip just to make that message go away. And let's update our requirements txt, which is over here. So let's run pip freeze and pipe the output of that into the requirements.txt. And now we can see our requirements.txt has OAuth lib and requests. Let me hop back over into project directory. And let's run the server again. So I've got it installed. Everything is working. Now we actually have to set up our account with the noun project and get an API key so we can talk to their API. So let's do that. And you all will need to do this for your assignments. So please do pay attention to this part. It's pretty straightforward, but nonetheless. Joining is easy. If you have a Google account, I just recommend signing up with Google. It's free. I should already have an account, so I'm going to log in using my Google account. Once I've logged in, I want to do a couple things. I want to look at if I go to, let's see, I always get a little confused. So yeah, settings is not where we want to go. Once I log in, I want to click on API and get started. And this takes me to where I want to be. It's always a good idea to look at like pricing of stuff just as a sanity check. I don't seem to have pricing on here. I think explore the API. This is what we want, and I'll dump this link in the Zoom chat. Actually, I'll dump this in Zulu questions because this will be useful for us. And here. And this is where we can explore their API, and they actually have like an interactive test. But to do it, we need an API key. And they wanted us to put it here and the secret here. So let's go ahead and take care of this. So I need to go back over here to this API section, click on Get Started. And over here where it says Manage Apps, you can create an API key and token if you hit Create a New Application. Doesn't really matter. I've just been making one per cohort, but you could really use one for everything. It doesn't matter. And we'll hit Generate API Key. And down here, we have a key and a secret, and then we can paste these into the API Explorer. Now, for something real where maybe we're paying for it, you don't want to share these because then someone else could be using your account and you would be getting charged money to whatever, credit card or payment you have set up with this. Plus, most APIs have a rate usage limit so that I don't just make like 100,000 requests like every 5 minutes or per hour, because we could write a Python program with an infinite loop to hit the noun API endlessly. And that's actually called a denial service attack. If someone malicious wants to take down a website, if you just flood it with requests, you can crash it. So most APIs will, per account, rate limit how many requests you can make, per minute, per hour, and so on, which is another reason why keeping these secret is important. But since this is for learning purposes, the fact that this is going on a video on YouTube and all this stuff doesn't matter because it's a free account and I will just delete it later. So sometimes you just have one value and it's the secret, or it's called a token. Here they have a key. And then there's a secret value that we sort of have to protect, and we need to use the two together. Like this, the key uniquely identifies me, the secret authenticates me. And now if we try theirs, we see that indeed it works. I thought I could actually change it, but I can't. But here we can see the different parameters we can pass in for the icon. There's a lot of stuff, frankly. We really only need to worry about the query parameter or the search term. And this is really useful because we can see even just searching for Thunderbolt, we get a whole bunch of things back. All these tags and styles. And I can see here, this looks like one Thunderbolt. And then it looks like we have another Thunderbolt. And another Thunderbolt. And each one has a ton of information. And you know what? For my Pokemon API, maybe I don't need like 50 different Thunderbolts. Maybe I just need one. And if we look here in the URL, we see that the way they've designed this is after. Let's make this bigger. Can everyone read this okay? Okay, awesome. So this is actually quite important because this is an extremely common pattern with REST APIs. And in fact, we will implement it as well. We saw how we can use the URL, right, for resources and the parts of the URL as part of a REST API. But we can also use the parts of a URL after a question mark. And these are called URL parameters or query parameters. You'll hear people call them params or query params. And here I have a key and a value, right? Query equals Thunderbolt. It's separated by an ampersand, and then I have another key and value. Limit equals 1. So this is what we'll want to build in our Python code, because this gives me one icon back. Maybe we add more later, but this makes life simpler because we can see here there's this icons array, and it's got a whole bunch of stuff in it with tags and all these things. But really, out of all this stuff, the only thing I need is the actual URL itself, which gives us the image. So this is important too, because it helps you explore the shape of the JSON so we can manipulate it in Python. I just want to pause and then see if folks have any questions, as I know I've kind of jumped around a little bit, but also we've been moving a lot through this API.
What was the pip code to install?
Oh yeah, it's in the curriculum, but
Okay.
it's just pip install requests, pip install requests _ OAuth_lib. All right, so I just want to say again, this part about query parameters here is really important. So make sure that you start getting comfortable with this and ask questions and get familiar with it. Now that we've talked about this, let's actually write some code using the noun API. So what I want to do is I don't need this URL's py. I don't need that URL's py. I want my view from the API app, and let's start making this real. And we're going to have to do a couple things here, right? We've made our skeleton. We had it had a get method. We've had it say hello. We're going to have to use OAuth and the noun API key and secret to set up some authentication. We're going to have to construct the URL we made the HTTP GET request to, and then we're going to actually have to make the HTTP GET request, and then we're going to have to parse the response data for the image icon. So this one we can in fact get back to later. We'll put that under like a stretch goal. And here then we need to send back the noun API data in our response. So let's do this step by step. I'm going to need to import an OAuth authentication related library, and it's okay for this to be a little magical right now. I'm also going to need to import the requests library that we'll use in just a minute to actually make our HTTP request. And now let's start writing some code. And I'm going to need to use my API key and my API secret. And what I want to do is I need to create an authentication object with OAuth. And I need to give it the key and the secret. So in here is going the key first. And then the secret second. And this is what we are going to use with the requests library, so that when we send an HTTP request to the noun API, it doesn't just reject it.
I do have a question, just about like the keys and whatnot. If we were to have like, I don't know, our project with a key that we needed to be sensitive in a repo, is there a way to like hide it and still keep it secret in that repo or no?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, once we get this working, we're going to see how to do that with the .env file. Yeah, great question. We're going to get there shortly. Right now, this is 1000% insecure. That's an excellent point. You would not actually do this. This is just to get us started, and we're going to refactor it in a little bit. let's make the endpoint that we want to hit for the noun API. And again, I'm using theirs as a guide. And it's API version v2, it looks like. So let's put that in there. And let's try maybe /icon/1. Let's just hard code. And in fact, let's add that. Later we'll add a to do. Don't hard code the icon ID. And we'll add it to do here. Move secrets out of code and into .env file. For prototyping, this is totally fine. You don't want to commit this though, because once you commit this, it's in Git. So even if I change the code later, it's in the commit history. So right now, this is very much just to get us started. And if we look over here, we can, in fact, let's just test out exactly the query we want. This is exactly it. It works. So we can have some confidence here. Now let's use the requests library to get that request. And so we're going to do requests.get endpoint, and we are going to pass as authentication this auth object. And if we hover over .get real quick, we can see here the first argument it wants is the URL we're sending the request to. There's a bunch of objects or named arguments we can pass. If you look in their docs, it'll talk more about auth. In the interest of time, I don't want to open that door. But we can see here that it sends a GET request. It's going to return a response object. And that actually is probably worth a quick look in their docs, since we're going to have to use it in just a minute. So if we go here to response, this is what we're going to get back. It's going to be an instance of this object. We can see it has headers, has history, has all these things. And then it has a method to get JSON back is dictionaries and lists and stuff like that. So one important difference is with Axios, we would have to use async await, right? Or a promise. In Python, with requests, an HTTP request is a blocking operation. Python will wait until requests get a response, which is good and bad, right? It's simple, but if the noun API project server has crashed, our code will hang and throw an error. There are ways to deal with that, but it's a little outside of scope of right now. Right now, we're just getting sort of the basic version of this working. So let's get our data that we're going to get back using the response.json method that we were just looking at in their docs. Let's print it out. Noun project get response JSON, and I'll just print it out here like that. And then finally, let's just leave this as is for now, and we'll put a to do here. To do send back response JSON. Because I've written a lot of code here. There's a little more formatting we have to do, but this is actually like 5 lines of code, 2 imports, interacting with the third-party API. Let's test this and make sure it works. So let's go ahead and run our server. Server's up and running. So far, so good. I'm going to hit refresh here. Let's in fact open up the network tab in case we have to debug anything. I know I'm not going to see anything interesting here, but I want to see that print statement here in the terminal. So let's in fact clear the console so I don't have to look at irrelevant, messy stuff. And if I scroll up, we're good to go because we've got that JSON. So I know that this is working. So we've now, to go back to this diagram, we've over here from our Django server made a request. Well, really from here, when I hit refresh on that page, it told our Django server to fire off its API view that made a request over to the Noun API. And then the Noun API sent back some data, and we haven't sent that data back, but that's our next step. But we've now got a third-party API integrated on our backend. I just want to check in to see what questions folks have before you move on to deal with putting these secrets in a .env file. How's everyone doing? What's on people's minds? How are we feeling?
I'd say I'm at like a 4, but I'm also a bit behind. So
What might be good? What are you curious about that might be good to go over here or dig into?
I mean, it all makes sense to me. I mean, I get why we're using the auths and we're using the endpoint and the response, and we have to JSON it. But I feel like when I go and try to do it, it's not going to be this smooth, obviously.
Right. I mean, it's not. I mean, I've been programming for like over a decade, so it's definitely not going to be this smooth. So the secret is this. This is actually the secret to productivity. You will not want to do this. Basically, this is pseudo coding. You can, if you want, get fancier and try to make it feel a bit more like code. This is the step that everyone skips. But look at how many moving parts there were just to make this happen. I created an API app. I added it to settings PY. In the project URLs PY, I added it here. I then had to create more routing here. We then had to create our API view, and that's just to get set up. And then we have the new stuff that we're learning today, where I had to create the account on the Noun API and create the key and the secret, the endpoint, the response, and all this stuff. You know, when I'm writing this code, I have our curriculum pulled up and I'm using it as a guide. I don't do this from memory. Like often Francisco or myself will sit down and we'll code up like the lesson in advance. I'll often like spend at least, you know, ideally like a solid 2 hours, like watching a previous lesson video, going over notes. So when we lecture, it's a pretty, Francisco especially, I think, is having it be really smooth. Obviously, that's not how actual software development works, right? It's messy. You make tons of typos. Point being, it's impossible to keep all this stuff in your head, and it's actually, frankly, just counterproductive to try. That's not what great software engineers do. What great software engineers do is they get it out of their head. So I really encourage you all to get in the habit of writing this pseudocode, like writing out steps. And even if the step is like, I'm not sure what's next, something with JSON maybe, I'll write that down. Because I can still get like through step 1, step 2, step 3. And then when I get here, I pause and I go back and I watch a video and I review and research. This is also where you, like, you know, the AI is getting really good. It can generate this for us. We still need to be able to understand and review the code. But this is actually the important part, to know how the pieces work together. And this is actually where you'll really cement your learning. So if you skip this, I think it's really counterproductive in the long run. And I also want to say in that same vein, like, please ask questions as we go into these lectures, because I want to move at a good pace to make sure we have a good demo of things. But the goal is also for you all to have a good understanding of this stuff. And you all will get there, because I know every lesson, it feels like a lot. And then once you get your hands on the assignments, you're good to go. But my assumption is like if no one's asking me questions, that people are feeling comfortable and tracking with what we're doing and feel confident about it. And once you join a software engineering team, that's going to be the assumption of the senior engineers as well. So again, it's really in your best interest to get really comfortable being a squeaky wheel. That's a bit of a long speech. I think this is actually probably a good stopping point, because the step after this is adding the .env directory or the .env file and moving out these secrets. So why don't we take 10 and then we'll do that, and we'll also expand on this a bit, and then we'll see some testing. Sound good?
Yeah, I will just say, like, at least for me, I'm able to understand like conceptually what you're doing, and like as you're doing stuff, it's making sense as you're going through it.
Cool.
But I just think the nature of the beast is gonna have to like be getting hands-on with it in order to like really truly understand how to do it and how to, I guess, set these things up for ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good point. I appreciate you saying that, because I know sometimes I get like a little fired up about this, and it's easy to forget just like how much new stuff you all are digesting like in one go. And honestly, you all are doing awesome. I think, when I kind of ask like how are people feeling, like what's on people's minds, my only concern is if like there's stuff where you're like, I'm not sure what that does, or I'm not sure why we do it this way. I just hope people aren't sitting on those questions.
Yeah, I think a lot of those questions arise for me when I'm doing the hands-on, and then that's when I really have more questions about the things that we go over.
Got it. And that makes sense too. No, I appreciate you saying that. Cool. All right, let's take 10 folks, and then we will see how to move our secrets into a .env file. Thank you, and see you all in 10 minutes. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked a lot about the why of third-party APIs. We've seen how to explore an API, and I do want to mention that briefly. I spent a little time on this. It is really important to spend time reading through the docs of an API you might use. We'll talk about it with the personal project, but at teams I've been on, like it might be if like I remember at this one company at Reverb, we were gonna switch. You could like buy and sell music gear, so it was e-commerce, and we were using one company as a credit card provider, and we were switching to a different one because it handled like payments from Europe better or something, and like that was a big deal. And for like 2 weeks, it was a senior engineer's job just to do, they call it a spike, like a prototype of reading their API docs, writing code using it to really make sure we could work with it, and that, it wouldn't take forever, and to know how to get the data we needed. And when we get to the personal projects, you all will actually have to submit like a pitch to me and Francisco. You'll have a lot of requirements. You have to use Django, you have to use React, and you have to use 2 third-party APIs. And one of the requirements in the pitch is telling us specifically which APIs you'll use, because by far the biggest challenge folks run into on the personal project is you get a week and a half into it, and then you realize that the API you're using doesn't give you some data that you need, or that it's really hard to work with. So we spent a little time on it, but this step of taking time to read docs and play around with the third-party API is really, really important. Really with any third-party library, but especially APIs. Okay, on that note, let's keep on rolling. We are going to use a Python library called .env. And yeah, their website is not very good. What this does is it's going to read key value pairs from a .env file and create them as environment variables. And so first off, I need to install this library. And let's put their docs over here on the side. And let me just go ahead and kill my server. I'm going to do pip install Python from.env. I'm going to do pip freeze, and let's pipe it to the requirements.txt file. That's a level up. And now I can create here in my project root directory where manage.py is and everything else, a file named .env. And here I'm going to take, let's close out some of these things that we don't need. This auth stuff and put it here. And I don't need all this other stuff because this is just plain old key value pairs. In fact, I don't even really need the quotes. All I need is the key name, and the convention is to make it all uppercase. Actually, this should not be Django key. Excuse me. We're going to call this noun API key. And we're going to call this noun API secret. And now I've got it in my .env file. And now what I can do is over here in settings py, we're going to actually use this approach here that they show. We actually have it in our curriculum. So I'll pull that up because actually we have the better example. Now over here in settings py, I'm going to import from .env, import .env values. I'm going to create a variable named env. I'm going to tell it where to go to get the .env file. And now if I wanted to, we can print, and let's just say f strings settings py env dot noun API key. And in here, let's just put env dot get noun API key. And if I run my Django server again, I should see that print line printed out. And I see it printed twice, in fact, which is kind of interesting. Django must have done some sort of reloading, but we've got what we've needed here. And now what I can do over here is if we go to our view for the app, and we've done most of this stuff, by the way. Right, and now we are putting secrets in the .env file. And so here, we're going to from settings. Let's see here. And actually, it's probably Pokédex proj, which is the module or directory .settings import env. And now here I can do env.get noun API key, env.get noun API secret. Let's run our code, make sure nothing has broken or that I haven't done anything silly. It works. I still see the print statement that tells me that we've successfully hit the noun API. So we've successfully refactored our code. So to recap, we installed python-dotenv. From it, we import .env values into settings py. We then use that to grab the contents of a file named .env. And this file is key value pairs of our secrets, and it gets loaded as a dictionary. And we can then import that dictionary and use it anywhere we want in our code. And then our last step is to make sure the .env file does not get into version control. And to do that, I'm going to make a file named getignore. And I'll just put it here. You can have multiple getignore files, in fact. And I'm just going to put .env in the .getignore file. In fact, in this directory where the .venv file is, I should probably have a getignore file here too, to ignore the Python virtual environment directory. So we'll ignore the .venv file. You can have multiple getignore files. I also could have done Pokédex proj/.env to ignore that. I also could have done */.env to ignore a .env file in all directories. I'll leave both of these here just as examples. So in fact, if you do */pycache, it will ignore pycache in every single directory, which is actually extremely useful. And you can add comments in a .getignore file.
So GitHub knows to read every git.getignore file that you have in your project, essentially.
Close. Git reads the .getignore file, and it will never even send this stuff to GitHub.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, let me show you all what that looks like. So I'm in our demos and notes repo. So if I type git status, that this whole directory, the algo stuff will ignore, needs to be added. So let's do git add 5 backend APIs. I know if I do git status, there's a bunch of stuff here, right? Because we have a whole project. But if I skim through this, what we don't see is a .env file or a .venv file. So git add ignores whatever we put in a .getignore file. So then when I commit this and push it to GitHub, it's not in there. Does that help answer your question, Jason? Cool.
Do the command one more time.
I want to keep rolling just because I want to make sure we have enough time to cover testing. But the file name is .getignore. And then we can put in the names or paths to the files and directories we want Git to not use. I do have
all I want to know is just what you typed in. That's it. I missed that part by accident.
I just done git status, then I just did git add dot and to create the file I just used the touch command for .getignore.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Could you go back to the view to show the actual how you replace the authentication? I just want to screen grab it real quick.
Yeah, I mean, again, I pushed all this to the demos and notes code repo. So I think that's probably honestly going to be easier than the screen grab, but if this is useful, sure.
Yeah, I'm just updating in real time some of my notes.
Okay. I do want to keep moving on though. I'm glad that people wrote along, though we unfortunately we can't prioritize that. I do have one question for people. Why is this .env file named .env? It's short for environment. What environment are we referring to?
Is it the virtual environment?
Good thought. No.
The Django project.
No, not that one either.
Is it your Linux?
It is your Linux.
Operating system.
Yeah, it's the shell environment. So we've seen this once or twice, but remember, like I've shown a couple times, if I do this, we get a shell environment variable. That's exactly what we're doing here. And if I open up a new shell and I try to print out that shell environment variable where the $ indicate it's a variable and then we have the name, it doesn't exist. Because every time I open up a new terminal or a new shell, it's a new session. So we have a new shell environment every time we start a new shell session. Echo, by the way, is how you print stuff on the shell. You can print out text. And then if you make an environment variable, and it doesn't have to be all caps, that is just the convention. As you can see, you create a Linux shell environment variable with key and value on opposite sides of the equal sign. You use it with the $sign. And if you go back and forth between shell environments, it is not there. So this hooks into that. This actually gets run to create some shell environment variables, is sort of what happens. So this is actually about the shell and Linux and command line stuff. Which you don't have to worry about too much, but it is good to know that that's what this is, because later on, with AWS and deploying to the cloud, we'll actually see sometimes instead of doing it this way on a cloud server, I might have a script that does noun API key equals like XYZ123, but we'll get there later. I just want to check in and see if folks have any questions around that. Cool. All right, let's talk about let's add a couple more features and then let's take a look at testing. And Django, and Max, you're correct. We should put our Django secret there as well. I think it's in settings PY. Yeah. So actually, now that we have this .env variable, this Django secret key that we don't directly use right now, but gets used for some authentication related stuff later. We can put it there. And then in fact, we can just do like secret key equals env.get. And we should probably call it Django secret key. Django secret key. You can also do stuff like put your debug settings in a .env file. And this is actually really useful because now when I'm ready to deploy this to the cloud and have it be live, if I want to turn debug off, I don't have to modify my source code. I can have a .env file on the server with Django debug set to false. So that's a little more advanced and we'll talk about it later, but the .env file is sort of like your configuration settings for your whole system as well as holding secrets. And it would help if I navigated back into my project directory. And let's just make sure that I haven't done anything silly and that everything runs. And we're good to go. All right, let's see how to work with our data more and add some more features. So we've gotten this data, but we haven't done much that's very useful with it, right? We're not even sending it back. And frankly, this print statement here is super messy and not very easy to look at. And my job as a software engineer is to make the computer do the work. So let's start by making our coding workflow and debugging workflow easier. Let's import a built-in Python library called prettyprint. And we're going to create a pretty printer, and we can just do it here. And in just a moment, we'll see what this does. This is going to print out our JSON much more nicely. Can anyone tell me why I created it here on line 26 and not inside this get method?
So if you make another class, you can use it there too.
That's a good reason. There's another reason.
Is it so it doesn't get returned with the return value? Like, I don't know. I don't think that would actually work. Never
So
mind.
that you can access it within it.
Well, if I'd created it here, we could still access it within it, right?
But you have to
So
do that for every single class you build.
you're right too, Tim, and someone else was saying this, like if I put it outside, I can reuse it. Let me ask you all a question. If I have it here, well, let me show you what it does. And then we'll talk about this.
It becomes a class attribute. When it,
It was a little hard for me to hear what you were saying there.
wouldn't it become a class attribute?
It's not a class attribute because we're just defining it the way we could define or create an instance of a class inside a method. If I put it up here, then it would be a class attribute. Let's there we go. And this is what it does. It prints this out more nicely. So let me ask you all a question. When I hit refresh, how much of the code inside this get method gets run every time I click on this? And this is sort of a trick question.
Is it every time?
Everything. Yeah, totally a trick question, right? When I hit this, the HTTP request goes here and it calls this get method. So if I click on this 3 times, how many times do we create a new instance of this pretty printer?
3 times.
Yeah. Do I need to create a brand new pretty printer every time I want to handle this HTTP request and send back a response?
No.
No. So that's really the biggest reason. It's also good for sharing. And it doesn't make a huge difference because this is cheap. This is not a lot of memory or space or power, but it's important to start thinking about this because there will be other situations where indeed like does matter. And if we, were Amazon and we had a massive amount of scale, then maybe that does start to matter. This way it's created once, this instance of this class, and we use it here. If I put it inside the method, it's created every single time this endpoint gets hit. I just want to check in and see if folks have any questions there or things on people's minds.
The Django secret that you put inside of your env file, what was that about?
Oh, Django uses that for something authentication related that we haven't talked about yet. You don't have to do that, but it was already in settings PY. And when we get to, it's called setting it up and deploying for production, for putting it on the cloud for live, it's a good practice to put it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you just create a pointer in the settings.py to it, just like you did the other way?
Yeah, it's all in a dictionary, and so we just grab it from the dictionary.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. If let me pull that up real quick. Yeah, so what happens is right here, this grabs that file and it turns it into a dictionary, and then here we're accessing the different keys on that dictionary.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. We will come back to that more later in the course. I just want to make sure that today, with the retro coming up, I don't run out of time to talk about testing and some of the other things we're going to add. But yeah, that's a good question. And it touches on, I'll send a link. There's something called the 12-factor app. There's like a whole design principle behind this. And I'll send a link out after the lecture on that for folks who are interested. Yeah, good question. So we've got our JSON pretty printed out. This is much nicer to look at. Now we can kind of really see what it is we want to grab. And I want the icon URL, right? I can see here's icon, inside here is some object, and here's icon URL. So maybe here, finally, we can do something like this. And I'm accessing inside a dictionary the key icon. And in fact, let's just send this back and see how we do. So that's good, right? We're getting this big JSON object back, but I actually don't want all of that. I just want the image URL. So inside that dictionary, let's access the icon URL. And now this is a nice lean mean endpoint that returns an image for whatever we want. And we're accessing a third-party API through our Django API. And our React front end has a nice lean mean API, our API that it can talk to. And it doesn't have to worry about dealing with the giant JSON object the Noun API sends back. So let's use this now that we've written this. And let me close some of this stuff out. And let's go back to our Pokemon for a minute so that we can start to make this a bit more interesting. And let's open up our Pokemon model. And we have a lot of good fields here. Let's add a type. And we'll not moves, but for Pokemon types, we will add images. So let's make it a char field. Let's give it a default type of normal. And it would be really nice to have a validator for this. So let's actually write a validator and actually define the different types that our Pokemon can have. So I'm just going to kind of move this up there a bit so we can see it. And let's open up our Pokemon app validator. Can everyone hear me okay, by the way?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. And let's validate our Pokemon type. And I'm going to use the validate name method down there as a guide. And I'll just call this value. And let's make a list of allowed types. And in fact, I'm just going to copy this in the interests of time. And I think I'm going to close this out just to give us a little more screen real estate. And I'm not a Pokemon expert, but Francisco is. So I think this is a pretty good list of Pokemon types. So now let's check if the value passed to this validator is one of these types. And if it's not, we want to raise a validation error, just like we do in our other validator. And we want to say invalid type. Please choose from, and this code is going to get a little fancy. So let me give us a little room so we can see what we're about to do here. Inside this app string, we're going to write a little Python. And we're going to use join and allowed types. And this is going to give us a nice comma separated list of all the types in there. And we'll just stick a period at the end just so we have a full sentence. And now we have a really nice validator for Pokemon types. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to import it. And I'm going to use it. So I've updated my model. This is great. In fact, why don't we go, I know we haven't been using the Django shell in a minute, but why don't we open up the Django shell? And from Pokemon app dot models import Pokemon. And why don't we grab Pikachu? And I forgot I need to do Pokemon dot objects. Oh, column Pokemon app Pokemon type doesn't exist. I forgot to do something probably really important here.
To migrate it.
I totally forgot to migrate. Let's go ahead and create a migration. And now let's apply it. And if I spelled migrate correctly, we would have had that working. So now we've got a migration applied. Where I wanted to go with this was like, I can have a Pokemon, and in fact, in the interest of time, let's use Django admin. So let's go to localhost 8000/admin. And let's go to our Pokemon and let's go to Pikachu. And Pikachu is a normal type. Let's make them, a ghost type, even though I don't know if that's valid. And now over here, let's do localhost 8000 API v1 Pokemon ID 1. So I've got my Pokemon, I've got Pikachu, but I don't see their type. What do I need to change so that I can see my Pokemon's type here?
Your serializer?
Serializer.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go to our Pokemon app. We're going to add type to the list of fields on the serializer. And now we've got our Pokemon type. So now we're really cooking. And the last thing we want to do is have the noun project API accept an argument, because right now, if I go back to my noun project view, it's not very interesting. It's always getting the same thing. So what we're going to do is we have to modify two things. We have to go to the URLs py here. And I want it to accept some sort of Pokemon type. So we're going to call it a string. And we're going to do types. And that's step one. And I can test this out by going here to my code. And now I should be able to /v1/ noun/ghost. And I've actually, any guesses what caused this error? I didn't do this one on purpose, but this is a good one to see.
It's because you didn't pass it into the get method.
Exactly. Yeah, good call. So now this is working, but it's still not doing anything interesting. We're still actually getting back the same image asset that we were getting before. We now actually have to pass this to the noun API here. So this becomes an F string. And instead of hard coding that, we're just going to pass in the string. And I think this will work. We can test this out. But let's run it and see how it goes. So it looks like we do have a JSON decoding error. We may have to do an extra step. My guess is let's go ahead and just print out this endpoint. This is the easiest way to debug something like this. And go to our server. And if we scroll up a bit, actually, let's just clear, do it one more time. And now over here, we've got, this is the printout of the endpoint. And let's see, it won't let us do that because we need to authenticate. But if I hop over here to my testing, to our API Explorer, here's where we can test this out with icon ID, right? Because we're doing v2/icon/types, but that doesn't seem to really do what we want, right? If I put in ghost, that's not going to work because it's looking for an icon ID and it wants an integer. So I actually need to use a different endpoint. It probably has to be this query one. Because what I want to do is I want to look for ghost. I want to search. And forgive me, let's close this one out so we can see this a little more clearly. Here we go. I want to search for ghost. And I want to get a result. And I think I only want one back for simplicity. So let's modify this a little bit. Let's close some of this stuff out that we don't need to get a little more screen real estate. And here I want v2/icon, but we can't look up an icon. We can't, that has a specific ID. I actually need to do a query. And we're going to look for a type in there. And I'm going to add limit equals 1, just for simplicity. And if we look here, we see that this response body is going to be a little different. It's going to send back an array of icons. So here, we're probably going to need to have this to be icons. And we're going to want to then grab the first icon in it. And then it looks like it is probably this thumbnail URL that gives us the image file we want. So I think it's going to be icons sub-0 thumbnail URL. So we could get this wrong, but we can try this out, and with the pretty printing, we can debug. So let's put this over here. Let's get rid of TL draw that we're not really using. Let's get rid of this other stuff we're not really using. That we do want. Let's try this again. And this sure seemed to work. I've got a link back, and it is indeed a ghost. So in fact, we can search for Thunderbolt, and we get back a Thunderbolt. And so now, again, our API really provides a nice layer over the Noun API for us to work with. So I just want to check in and see what questions folks have or what might be good to go over for this. And the big difference here, and this is a big part of working with third-party APIs, is, with different you sometimes need to use a different endpoint and a different query pattern to get what you want.
That limit, is it just like limiting it to return one like object or instance?
That is exactly what it's doing. If I did limit 10, let's see what we get back. We don't need a limit at all, but you can see right here in the response, it's a dictionary or a JSON object, and we get this generated at metadata, and then we get a list of icons, and we will get, if we don't add a limit, there's usually some built-in limit, but it could be 50. I don't know. And we don't need 10 icons. And then each of these is an object with all this stuff in it. And in fact, if we wanted to tell the API we wanted to go to the next page of icons, it's giving us an ID to do that. It's telling us there's 1,182 icons total. And there's some usage limit information here that we don't have to worry about. But for our purposes, we only need one icon. So it simplifies stuff to just set the limit to one. Yeah, great question. What other questions do folks have? What else are people curious about? Okay. Oh yeah, please.
Related to the content earlier, specifically with pretty print, could you in your settings.py file just import pprint and then define it there so you wouldn't have to continue to do it in every file?
You could. It's sort of the real deal answer is you probably don't want to do it there because you kind of want to keep settings PY focused on like big picture stuff. But maybe you could also put it in like a project file or a utilities file, like in the Pokédex project. But you're absolutely right. That is one spot we could put it. Settings PY specifically, I would recommend, like they have a lot of stuff in here, but if we look at it, this is like really critical project sort of configuration and settings stuff. So it's a good habit just to keep stuff organized, to keep stuff that's sort of not like this out of there. But you're absolutely right. And in fact, what we would do, I would just make like a utils.py or like logging.py and put it there, and then we can import it from there. Yeah, so you're thinking the right thoughts.
And then just in each individual Python file, you would just say import logging.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, here, let me just rename this to yeah, we'll just leave it as logging. What we would do is exactly like you were saying. This goes here. We do import pprint. And that's actually kind of nice because then over here, I don't need to import pretty printing into this view, which helps keep this code leaner and more focused. And I can do from Pokédex project logging import pp, right, as our pretty printer. And that should work just fine. And that's actually a pretty nice pattern. Yeah, great question.
Thank you. And I appreciate the full context answer instead of just a yes or no.
Yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah, stuff like settings PY you got to be mindful of. And truth be told, it's not a huge deal if we had put pretty print in there, but in here, it is good to be thinking about. All right, let's talk about testing. And I think we have just enough time to cover what we need to. I know today is a bit of a big day. Do we want like a 2-minute break or should we just keep rolling?
And just keep it going.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. Let's talk about testing. So we've written all this code. We've interacted with a third-party API. We've connected it up. We've got Pokemon moves. We've got a serializer that will serialize, not moves, but types. Right? We added type to our Pokemon serializer. Pikachu's now a ghost type. Eventually, we can use the Noun API to get image assets for our Pokemon types for our cool front end. The question is, how do we test all this stuff? So we have this test views file from yesterday. And the challenge here is going to be, and this we took care of, so we can get rid of that. The problem is if we actually hit the real noun API endpoint for our tests, what if it costs us money each time? What if the noun API server is down? What if we reach our monthly usage limit on the API because of running lots of tests? Plus, once we have like 200 tests, making real HTTP requests is slow and it'll take forever for the tests to run. So the solution to all this is we fake or mock the HTTP requests to the noun API. So that's what we're going to see how to do here. And this is a very common strategy for testing code that interacts with third-party services. Sometimes with end-to-end tests, you might actually want to hit the service, but very often we actually want to fake it. And that gets us like at least 80% of the value of the tests. And luckily, Django REST client gives us, or Django REST framework gives us a tool to do this called API client. So we're going to use that. And the unit test library that we're using also gives us a tool to do this. And I don't think there's any real rhyme or reason to the order of this. From unit test.mock, which is sort of the standard term for this, import patch. And patch as in monkey patch, which we saw way back with OOP. So we are going to do a little faking here. We're going to make a new class called noun project test. It's going to import test case from unit test. We're going to write a setup method that's going to run before every test. And like we were talking about not having to create like a new pretty printer when we run the tests, we'll create the API client here. So this actually will create a new API client every time. And you actually want that for tests. You want it to start fresh from tests so that each time it's from scratch, so a previous test doesn't mess up something else. So now that we've got all this, let's start writing some code and see how we can use it. I'm going to write a test method, test, let's call it Pokeball image API view. We're going to try and get an image of a Pokeball from the noun API. And we actually have to pass an argument in here called mock get, and we're going to fake a get request. And we actually need to use a decorator. Can someone remind me, like, I know this is kind of going way back, but like, what does a decorator do?
It turns it into an attribute.
Close. That's absolutely what we use it for when we were using getters and setters with Python. Under the hood, a decorator like feeds our function in as an argument to something else. And what this decorator is going to do is when we use the request library and the get method, it's going to fake it. It's going to replace it. It's going to monkey patch our code and replace it with something fake so that we don't make an actual API call. So let's see what this looks like in action. let's just get a variable for our noun that we want to look for here. And let's just come up with a fake URL that we want. Let's, in fact, just go here and search for Pokeball and see what the noun project gives us. That's pretty good. Let's use that one. So now we've got an image. Now we have to create a fake HTTP response. So this is our fake HTTP response from the noun API. And to do this, we're actually going to construct an object and we're going to give it a class. And I'm pretty sure if we Google, what is it, like Django REST framework mock response. Oh, let's see. I think actually the internet was helping me here. It might be in unit test. I need to check where exactly we're sourcing this from, but let's come back to that and let's focus for the moment on implementing. And I'll actually pull up the code here if it's useful for people to see that by the side. And so what we're going to be doing is this code right here. And so we're actually creating an object, we're giving it a class, and then we're giving it basically a method. And I'll kind of write this, I think, JavaScript style, if this is a little easier for people to see. And this is going to be a Lambda function, think arrow function, and it's going to return our JSON that we want. And I actually do need to have here as a reference our view to help me remember what this looks like, because we have a list of icons. So we need icons. And that's going to be a list. And inside there, we're going to have one thing. And inside there, there needs to be an attribute thumbnail URL. And inside there is our preview URL. And as a friendly reminder, the shape of that comes from looking at the noun API. If we go over here, this is the query that our code makes. Right, we're hitting that v2 icon endpoint with the query param. Excuse me, and it sends back an object, a list, and then inside that, an object with all the icon stuff. And frankly, we don't care about all this other stuff. We just want to test for the thumbnail URL. And so here, I'm creating an object of type mock response, and then I'm giving the attributes on the instance of this class, and this is a Lambda function that's going to return this dictionary. So there's a lot kind of bundled up in there. And now what we do is we do a fake GET request. This mock GET argument here, the test library will pass in using patch. I'm going to actually create a new instance of our mock response. And then the response equals self.client.get. And I do need to make sure that I've added a name to the API endpoint. So I'll go through that in just a second, but just to finish this off, we're getting our path by name. And just one moment, excuse me. Sorry about that. So we're making a GET request and we're passing in ball as the argument. So let's quickly pull up the URLs PY for our API app. And we're passing in Pokeball as the argument here. And I actually do need to give this a name. And the name should be noun project. And let me make sure I have the right variable there for name. Maybe it was in the Pokemon app URLs PY. Yeah, name equals, and then we give it the name. So now our noun API endpoint has a name, and this should work. And frankly, I've written a lot of code here. We still need to write sort of the test portion, which will actually be pretty straightforward. But I want to run this just to make sure that I don't have typos. So I'm going to put an assertion here just so I can run this code. And let's run this code and see how we do. And then we'll take the test home. And we are almost at time for retro. So I think we'll kind of be finishing up here on the dot. So let me run these tests. And the tests run. We do get some failures. But my guess is the failures are because of we've changed the Pokemon. And I'm pretty sure it's because of the normal type. So those are different tests that are failing. And I'm pretty sure if we go to our answers PY and we look here and we add type normal. And in fact, Eevee needs to be type normal. That those tests will pass. Yeah, and it looks like there's one. I'm not going to worry about that right now because that's the Pokemon test. And I want to finish our test, which is the noun project test. And we can see this running here. And frankly, the code didn't break, which is the only thing I care about right now. So let's take this home and actually write the assertion for this test. So to do this, we need to create what's called a sub-testing block. This is getting a little fancy, and it's okay for this to be a little magical. I want to be able to add multiple assertions within a single test method here. And I want to test inside here that our response status code is 200. And outside of that block, I want to test that if we look at the fake response content, it is indeed the same as the preview URL. So really, we're more testing the format of like how our API endpoint returns stuff. Because we've hard coded an awful lot of this test, and there's a lot of fake data, but our React app will still break if this isn't in the right format. So this is a valuable test, and as time goes on, more and more stuff will get added. I'm also testing that there's not an issue in any of my logic in that view endpoint that we wrote, even though we're not actually hitting the noun project API. And now if I run my tests again, we see that, and just for fun, let's change this to a 400 to cause this to fail. It looks like those passed just fine, right? The test failures are again about getting Pokemon, and I'm pretty sure because I have to add a Pokemon type to someone in here, like maybe it's Blastoise. But our noun API endpoint seems to be working just fine. And we get a failure when we want that 200 does not equal 400. So that's a good sign, right? And let's test here, HTTPS who.com. Let's test that our fake response is indeed sending back what it should. And if we scroll up a bit, we see our Pokeball image test failing. And over here, we do see this assertion error where we see our mock code did a good job of faking an HTTP request and response, and it does indeed not equal what we want. So you can see that, although in some ways this test is sort of testing like, does true equal true? What we're really testing is, do we correctly construct an HTTP request? Do we correctly format an HTTP? Do we correctly handle the format of the HTTP response we're expecting? And does our endpoint return something in the correct format? And that's all actually quite valuable. Again, the subtest here, it's really just allows us to add multiple assertions with inside one test. And I probably should have used it the other day when I added several of them. So this is worth reading in the docs, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. And it's okay for some of this to be magic right now. I think the main thing is getting a good sense of the big picture of what we're faking with this test and why we want to fake hitting the noun API. So that kind of wraps up looking at testing. I realize this one ran a bit long, so thank you. We do have the retro. So why don't we take 10? You can start filling out the doc, and then we can see like when we come back if we need more time to fill out the doc or if we dive on in. Does that sound good to everyone?
Hey Adam, can you get do you mind fixing it so I guess like the retro is like on top of the page? I just don't want to mess up the page trying to like get it to like look
Oh yeah,
proper.
totally. I'll do that right now.
Oh, okay.
Of course. Thank you for letting me know. Thank you very much, folks. I'll see you all in 10 minutes.